is kind of different. Me being interviewed. Normally I'm doing the interviewing.
As Adam said, I'm Kim Novak from Simcoe Reformer. I was looking at the little intro in the little pamphlet there, and something jumped out at me. It said 1969, and I thought, that's really interesting. 1969 was a very important year.
You were born that year.
Well, no, I wish. It was the year I started kindergarten here in Waterford at W.F. Hewitt School. It was also the year that Chris Thomas started his journalism career at the Delhi News Record. So, important day for journalism all around.
Well, I don't know about that.
You're a Delhi native.
That's right.
You grew up in Delhi. You're a graduate of Delhi District Secondary School.
Barely.
And then you went on to university in Waterloo. How did you get from Delhi to Waterloo, and don't say by car, and then back to Delhi in the newspaper business? What was it that?
Well, the university at that time was known as Waterloo Lutheran University. It was the only one that would have me. It was close to home, so I could have my laundry done on a weekly basis by my mother. And I was taking history and political science as a major. That was an interest of mine in high school. But as I approached graduation, I was wondering now, what am I going to do with a degree with a history and poli-sci major? And I just didn't know. So I returned home after graduation from university, and I'm working in a car parts factory in Woodstock, the same job that I'd had during the summer. And I received a phone call from the Delhi News Record asking me if I would like to go to work for them. And I went, wow, yeah, this is what I want to do. But I had literally given it no thought whatsoever. I had written the high school column for the News Record when I was in high school. And if truth be known, there was a bit of nepotism involved too, because the publisher of the paper I was a distant relative. But no, so I jumped at the chance, and I ended up at the News Record, working with some of the most colorful characters, the journalists that you all would know from the movies in the 1940s and 30s. These people were hard-bitten, hard-drinking, fun people, and very, very competent at their craft. And I just absorbed so much from just sitting around and listening to them, and they took me under their wing, and that was the start of it.
Funny anecdote I have about, well, I think it's funny, about the Delhi, you talk about the Delhi News Record, hard drinking. When I started my career in journalism, it was in the Delhi News Record building, even though I worked at the Nanticoke Times, and there was this old desk there that one of the reporters was using, and one day he decided to clean it out, and in the far back corner of this old wooden desk, there was a part bottle of whiskey. And immediately someone in the newsroom said, must have been Chris Thomas's desk. Was it?
No. I was not a whiskey drinker back then.
Oh, okay. You eventually moved on.
Well, may I?
Oh, go ahead, by all means.
Just a little anecdote. It's probably my second day on the job. And I'm assigned to go to the Delhi Public School for a picture of some sort. And I arrive, and it's in mid-afternoon, and all the kids are in the classroom, and I'm walking down the hall, and over the PA system in the hall of Delhi Public School where I had gone, I hear this tiny little voice coming over the PA system saying, "When I grow up, I want to be a journalist." And I went, that's me. They had culled through their tapes. I guess they had regularly taped the kids' aspirations for their careers. And this is what what I wanted to do apparently as a grade sixer. And they had found this tape and played it for me just to welcome me into the...
So you did eventually make it to the Simcoe Reformer.
Yes, I wanted to do this, for a long time.
But in journalism, one of the things, especially in small town journalism, you notice that it's a stepping stone. Mm-hmm. We get a lot of people from the city, want to come in, get their experience, and get out as fast as they can. Of course, when you're interviewing them for the positions, they all say, "Oh, I love small towns. I really want to work in a small town." You grew up in a small town. Mm-hmm. You decided to stay.
Yes.
What was the appeal of, did you ever give any thought to moving on to bigger things? I'm not going to say better, but bigger things?
Not really. No, the small town was the appeal to me. Because I thought myself as shy and not being able to meet people easily. And I figured if I was working in my hometown, at least I would stand a good chance of knowing the people that I'm talking to, which would make it a little more easy for me. And it was true. And everyone I talked to, I felt more and more comfortable, because I was very nervous about interviewing the mayor and the dignitaries like this. So yeah, it was the comfortable factor of a small town, and you have to remember, Kim, back in 1969. This area, Delhi, Waterford, Simcoe, Port Dover, this was the industrialization at Nanico. There were $2 billion steel plant, $500 million refinery, the Ontario Hydro plant. This area was the most prosperous, booming area of Canada at that time. And the stories were just, all over the place. I mean, and we were dealing with, the titans of industry. So it was not it may have been a small town, but the topics were of national and international significance. And of course, and I have to say, tobacco. The tobacco industry was, about at its peak. And that was a multinational industry, and I would meet people from all over the world, fascinating and very intelligent, funny people. So I was in the middle of where the action was, really.
When we met earlier, we talked briefly about some of the things that you would cover. And what were some of the highlights of?
Well, again, I think talking with the executives of these large companies and the people underneath them, almost everything that I did, I really, really enjoyed. And the truth was, some of the most interesting and entertaining and informative people that I met lived right here. And a lot of them were farmers. I did not come from a farm background at all, and I knew nothing about tobacco, really, despite living in Delhi and working in it. And these people were so hardworking and smart and innovative and open and friendly. And I was paid the greatest compliment I've ever received by a tobacco farmer. I was interviewing him. He had won the World Tobacco Championship, or not the World, but the Ontario Tobacco Championship at the Norfolk County Fair. And we did this regularly. We'd go out and do a one-on-one interview on him after the presentation. And I was sitting around his kitchen table in the middle of the afternoon, and this was for the Delhi paper again, and back then, and it was very tobacco-oriented, and I would have to ask him questions about what kind of fertilizer applications he was using. Like I knew what 24, 30, whatever it was. And I'm very dutifully, I'd been given a list of questions of what to ask him. And I'm dutifully recording all of this. And we're chit-chatting around. And towards the end of the interview, he looked at me and he says, "Don't you ever stop smiling?" And I hadn't realized that we're talking fertilizer applications, and I'm grinning at him because he was the nicest man, and I really enjoyed his company. And when he said to me, "You must really like your job," and he was right, I did. I really loved my job.
In addition to working together, at one point at another point, we were competitors. It's usually the upper echelons of a company that take that more seriously than us lowly reporters did at the time. We were all chummy and would get together. But I remember when I was a cub reporter, I was working for the Nanticoke Times, and periodically Chris Thomas and I would both cover City of Nanticoke Council. And I had heard about Chris, I had seen him covering things when I was obviously in public school, but you had this uncanny ability to appear to not really be paying attention to what was going on.
Yeah.
And it was, I was constantly amazed. Of course, I would never tell him this because he was the competitor, but we would be sitting at a City of Nanticoke Council meeting, and anyone that's ever attended them knew they were probably the most boring things on the face of the earth, and your editor would say, "I want 2 stories out of that, 400 words long, and don't quote so-and-so because they tell lies." Oh, okay, fine. But Chris Thomas, or Chris, I guess I can just refer to him as Chris, Chris would go and he would read a book. And I was constantly amazed at how you would sit there, you would be reading your book, counselors would be arguing about a sidewalk, and every once in a while he'd put his book down, pick up his notepad, write a quote, and then go back to his book. And I would wonder, okay, what's his story gonna look like? Because he's not really paying attention to this. The next day in the Simcoe Reformer, he would have all his information in there and usually have it right. And that's one of the things with reporting is, particularly in a small town, you have to be a jack of all trades. You have to be able to read a book, maybe not that example, but you got out of the industry at a time when social media was just starting to take off. But you reminded me when we met earlier today that you actually had your own form of social media at the Reformer in an item called Talk to Thomas. It was probably, when I went to the Reformer, it was probably one of the most popular things there. How did that come about, and what are some of the highlights of that?
Oh, goodness. The idea came from our previous editor, who had gone to a convention in the United States, actually, and he had picked up somebody in the United States had been doing this same kind of thing, and he came back and he said, "You would be the perfect guy to do this column because everybody knows you, and you'll be, you know, a face they can relate to, and hopefully this will go." For those of you who might not know, Talk to Thomas was basically a bitch line, where people with complaints or something on their chest, or they wanted some information, would call in, and originally I was supposed to answer their questions, or it was supposed to be informative, but it very quickly disintegrated into an opinion thing. They would just vent to me. And it turned out that the calls were highly entertaining. And back when it first started, they didn't have to leave their names or any identification. So again, it was just wide open. And again, it was hilarious, some of the stuff that they were going. And then callers would fight amongst themselves when they saw one item appear in the column, and they disagree with that column. And I didn't have to do a thing. I just sort of sat back and originally I had to transcribe. It was all in an answering machine tape. I had to transcribe the tape, and I am not a quick typer, and I'm going, the tape was going back and forth. Finally, they assigned a staff member to sit down and do the actual typing. And it just grew from there, and I never thought it would go. And as a matter of fact, I think the first couple of columns I was asking, you know, friends to call in just to beef it up. But again, it just took off, and to this day, and I haven't done, and this column hasn't appeared in 20 years, and there are teenagers who will come up to me on the street and go, "Talk to Thomas." Well, and also you recall the caricature that graced the column was done by the late Owen McLean, and it was just priceless. I used that in my campaign material when I ran for council, if you know.
We still own the copyright to that, by the way.
Damn. Well, I don't think anybody would want to see anything like that. And again, it just, I don't know what it was, but it gave people an opportunity to get something off their chest. And I always thought that I should get a grant from the Canadian Mental Health Association.
But it was a public service.
Well, it was. It was.
Allowing people to vent.
Yeah.
And
and again, we would sometimes, if there was a particular request, we would try to, you know, find out information or whatever.
And I was talked to Thomas when he went on vacation. And I remember a couple times when I would write little snide answers to things, and then you would have to deal with the fallout.
Oh yeah, yeah. I try to be very innocuous in any kind of commentary.
But around that same time, I think it kind of made you a local media celebrity. And about that same time, you were tasked with doing something else that was quite inventive for the local food bank.
Oh, yeah.
And could you tell people what you endured?
Well, I was asked, I think because of, again, my minor celebrity kind standing in the community that the local food bank thought to raise awareness and to raise money for the food bank, that would I ride the Ferris wheel at the Norfolk County Fair for a length of time. Well, I figured, well, this is one way of getting out of work. So I said, oh, okay, I'll do this. And I got a sleeping bag, and Rampro donated a rain suit for me, and I brought along a book and a cell, one of the old cell phones, the large ones, because the idea was that people could talk to Thomas while I'm on this Ferris wheel ride. And that didn't work out too well, because it must have been line of sight, because every time I dipped below the horizon, we'd lose the signal, so we just couldn't. Oh, by the way, I hated Ferris wheels as a kid. I got sick on a Ferris wheel as a kid, so I was really wondering how I'm going to do on this thing. I ended up, I think it was a total of 19 hours over 2 days. It was ghastly. It was legitimately ghastly. The fair, the weather, of course, at the Norfolk County Fair is not always the best. And I had to endure that. But the offshoot of all of this was the food bank. There were enough donations made to the food bank during this 2 days that to cover 6 months of their donations. So, well, I figured I'd do a little, I was kind of proud of that. A funny little sidebar to this, and speaking of Ramfro, a friend of mine was visiting relatives in New Brunswick, and he comes back and he hands me a copy of the New Brunswick newspaper, and they had run a Canadian Press article about my endeavors. And so my fame had reached as far afield as New Brunswick. One of my more memorable quotes of my life, I told the press that I'd made more revolutions than the CIA.
I touched on earlier about your departure from the Reformer came at a time when I don't think Twitter was invented yet. We were barely on the internet. We did have a web presence at the time. But now certainly we're doing videos, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook. And even though you still work as a journalist, you do work for us and you do work for others, you don't tweet.
No.
You're not on Facebook.
No.
You barely use a computer.
Yep.
What do you think about the changes in direction as far as the media is going?
I don't like it. I don't like it. Again, I can understand the appeal of it, and again, I'm being a little two-faced here when I mentioned the anonymity of Talk to Thomas, but I think there's a place in the world for journalists, if you like. I don't call myself a journalist. I'm a reporter. I'm not a good writer. I'm just a reporter. I like to report on things and get it right, get it accurate, and I don't put myself in a story. My opinions, I feel, don't matter a whit to my readers. So I'm just telling the story of the event that I'm covering. Today, Twitter, and I still don't understand what the idea is. goes over my head. I'm a total Luddite, and you know this because I can barely turn my computer on. But in the news business, you've got to have some accountability, some credibility. Now, everyone has an opinion, but I somehow wonder how useful that is in the dissemination of information. And I think there's a slight disconnect there, and people are mistaking opinion now for news or for reality, if you will. And that's basically the crux of my antipathy towards this kind of stuff.
Now, there's, in recent years, well, actually for several years now, there's been talk about the demise of newspapers going the way of the dodo bird. What do you see as the...
Ooh, wow.
That's my Barbara Walters question.
Yeah. Well, I do think that the internet, everything I think people will receive, a great majority of people will receive their information via the web, or whatever they call it. I'm not sure what it is. And that may continue. Get science fiction about this. Maybe they'll have little chips that they'll implant in your head at birth, and it's a news channel or something, and it'll just continually run all the time. But there'll always be a need, a want for that tactile piece of paper where you can read it and absorb it and wrap your fish in it. Hopefully the newspaper or the magazine will not go the way of the dodo bird.
When I met with you earlier, I told you I was going to ask you this question. You're a prolific reader. You're obviously a writer. You're probably a better writer than you think you are, but I think that's a lot of journalists are like that. A lot of reporters are like that. If you were to write a book, what would it be called, and what would it be about?
Well, they always say that you write about what you know. And so if I was ever going to write a book, it would be probably based on the trials and tribulations of a reporter. Now, I'd have to change all the names to protect the guilty, because I would steal liberally from my own immediate experiences, which have been, well, I wouldn't say they've been dramatic, but they've certainly, some of them. It would be a comedy, by the way, too, because my life's a joke. And yeah, and actually, I sort of toyed with the idea, but what's that? Oh, this new computer application, Dragon, is it, where you just speak? I'd probably, if I could utilize that technology, because I can be a bit of a motor mouth, and I probably think better verbally now. When I sit down to write now, I go, oh God, what was that thought that I had? And I only get halfway through a thought and I forget the other half. So yeah, I'm toying with the idea of maybe doing that. Just for fun.
You mentioned trials and tribulations. That's my segue for when you were working at the Reformer, you frequently covered court.
Yeah.
We were talking about how you see a lot of society, a lot of different elements of society when you cover court. You told me an interesting story about a former Crown attorney and what happened one day. And court is very, it's one of the areas where it's still very formal, certain protocols. And when I was asking you what some of the funny things you've seen over the years, you raised this story.
Well, again, court is better than any soap opera. And if, instead of, for people who may be retired or nothing better to do, I would recommend that you would go attend court just for an afternoon, and you'll see slices of life that you don't know that are there. But on this one particular occasion, there was some scruffy individual who was escorted out of the holding cells into the prisoner's docket in the courtroom, and his crimes were of not a serious nature, but he was just a career little miscreant. And the Crown Attorney was standing in front of the courtroom relating to the judge the evidence against this guy, when all of a sudden he's handcuffed. He vaults out of the prisoner's docket and runs right out of the courtroom. And everyone is just taken aback, including court security, and everybody's stunned, except for the Crown Attorney, who was a very distinguished-looking man, least likely to do what he did, which is run after the guy and tackle him. And they're rolling around on the floor by the time the court security came out and collared the guy. It was really funny. It was the talk of the courthouse for many, well, probably to this day.
We also spoke about how, as reporters, you're actually chronicling history. You had an opportunity in mid-1990s to actually witness something of national history, national importance, when you went to Montreal.
Oh.
What was that like, if you can say why you were going to Montreal in the mid-1990s?
Well, it was the referendum. I mean, our country was at stake here. And the local MP, Bob Speller at the time, arranged for, well, there was, I'd say about a dozen of us to fly down to Montreal on the day of the referendum. Well, yeah, it was, yeah. So we pile in this plane and fly out of Hamilton, and we land in Montreal. And we happened to be the first flight in that morning. And all the camera crews are set up to watch this influx of patriotic Canadians into the thing, and sort of waving at the cameras, "Hi, Mom," kind of thing. So we arrive at there's a big rally at Place du Canada in downtown Montreal, and I have never seen so many people in my life. The square was absolutely jammed. And as a reporter, if you got caught up in that mass, you would not be able to do your job, because you couldn't move. So I was floating around the periphery of the demonstration, if you will. And it was everything was it was all very friendly, and it was all a pro-Canada crowd. So there was no tension at all. But I did get sucked into this vortex, and I'm standing there. And I'm 6'3", but I'm not very big. And the crowd would move, and I would have to go with them. They just moved. It was the most frightening experience that I ever experienced. And so I just, sort of wormed my way back out, and again assumed a more safe position. But it was such an outpouring of patriotism, if you will. We interviewed again Quebecers who were voting no. for separation, and the outpouring of patriotism was just inspiring. It really was. It was one of the more uplifting moments of my career.
It is easy to get caught up in things, and certainly almost every day is different when you're a reporter. You know, it might be you're covering the Norfolk County Fair for the 6th, 7th, 8th, 20th time, but it's always different people. They always have a different story. If you had to pinpoint one item or one thing you had to cover that was your favorite or most memorable, what would it be?
No, I didn't. I didn't. Most. I can't really say that there's one favorite. One of the more memorable moments, and actually, I wasn't that heavily involved in it, was again, and I give great credit to you and your direction here, was 9/11. I can remember walking into the office that morning, and as was the wont of the newsroom, we're looking up at the television on the wall, and all of a sudden, bang, the plane going into the World Trade Center. And I went, oh, this is going to be big. And you set in motion our response. We're in Simcoe, Ontario. This is happening in New York City. Ostensibly, you would think, what, a small town newspaper? What? But we found people Simcoe people, local people, who lived in New York City and got on the phone and got interviews. You assigned a reporter, Meredith, and another photographer from Woodstock, who went down there and did just such a bang-up job, and again, interviewing local people. It was just one of the Reformer's great days in its history. I mean, the coverage that we provided under your direction, I'm not kissing up too badly, but was just outstanding.
Keep it coming.
just outstanding. And no, I did very little. I interviewed a couple of people involved in that, so my involvement was very minimal. But again, that's what made it exciting being a reporter. And as you say, the great thing is when you go in it to work each day, you don't know what's going to happen. And that's what makes it really fun. The money sucks, but it's really, it's a great profession.
It is. I guess we can, that's a good point, or a good way to end. So I just think that it sums it up pretty well. It is
that's why I did what I did, yeah.
It is a good profession. Now, does anyone have any questions they'd like to ask?
Chris, were you ever at a loss when you're interviewing someone and they just say something so unbelievable that you don't know what to ask them next?
Well, yeah, but it depends if it's totally inflammatory or off the wall. You just sort of beg off and you go, oh, thank you very much, and you leave. Because again, you do tend to, sometimes you get braced by people who have a particular a bias or a message they want to get across that may not be of this world. And interviewing is there's an art to it, you have to appear to be interested, and it's not always an act, but you learn. There's some degree of psychology to it. I always found that like humor dispelled a lot of tension that might be forthcoming again when you're butting heads with people. But yeah, I can't say a lot of that. Most people are pretty measured in what they say to the media. They realize, well, some don't, realize that, hey, if I say something stupid and I write it down and I put it in the paper, then everybody can see how idiotic it was. So, but generally speaking, the media is welcome in most situations. I know, for instance, well, we're in, say, the Hagersville tire fire. It was a classic example. I mean, that was an international event that attracted international media. Very impressive. You know, you get great graphics for the pictures of smoke billowing. But then there was the people that were forced to evacuate because of the smoke. And oh, this is kind of funny too. One of the advantages of being a small town reporter, I was being followed around by, okay, I'll admit it. I was following them around. It was a camera crew out of ABC Nightline, which was the Ted Koppel show. You know, it was a big deal, and I wanted to see how these guys did it. And this camera crew would rush up to a front door and bang on the door and barge in, and you know, we're ABC Nightline, and you've got to tell us, you know, what do you feel? It became embarrassing. I can remember I was sort of leading the way at this one particular house. I knocked on the door opened, and the woman said, "Chris, how are you? Come on in." And I got the story right there. And these big city guys were sitting there, you know, drooling at the interview.
I think they also came by limousine, too.
They came by limousine, yeah, from
Would you go back?
person. I'd say, well, the Reformer mobile.
The Reformer mobile also went to New York City for 9/11.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, the Reformer gets around. Oh, I'd like to think I could fake it, but well, from a purely, let's say, a technical point of view of covering the story, again, police scanners used to be Dave Regura in the newsroom, and we'd get a notification of an accident or something, and we'd rush to the scene. And at this particular time, we were all, I don't think I had a camera per se allotted to me, but I get this call, and I grab a camera off the desk and go screaming out the door. It wasn't actually very far away from the Reformer. And it was a pretty serious accident, and I got what I thought were some pretty dramatic photos. I come back to the office and I open up the camera. There's no film in it. This is the days of film, by the way, in the old days. So the sort of like that aspect. There's always situations like that, but one of the things you have to do is always be aware of your surroundings. You don't want to get it in the way of, say, first emergency responders, for instance. If there's a fire, you don't, stick your nose into a burning building. And you have to be respectful of the firefighters, of the police officers, of the ambulance attendants. And if you do that, and if you're aware of what's going on around you, and sometimes it's not focused on the event itself. Sometimes some of the best stories are on the periphery, perhaps a witness or something like this. And if you can see someone, if you see someone standing off to the side, for instance, and if you approach them properly and respectfully, quite often you get a very, very good story out of it. So, yeah, I think I've called people by their wrong titles, for instance, and things like that. But yeah, they deserve the comeuppance.
What?
Oh, and by the way, John, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Stressful, long hours, little pay,
Yeah.
but it was a lot of fun.
It was. This is where that bottle of rye, that's where it comes in, it comes in handy.
Well, I'd like to thank you very much, Chris, for being a part of this and sharing your stories.
Well, thank you, Kim, and thank the program. And I feel so very humbled and honored to be part of this series, especially like who I've known, like Hewitt, who I've known for 50 years, and he's just a delightful man, just one of the nicest guys. Yeah, one of my nicer interviews too. So.
Yeah, I think everyone, almost every reporter has interviewed Ike Hewitt at one point or another, and they all share your views as well.